About 4 months ago, just during the early days of COVID 19, many experts speculated that the venture backed startup universe might halt or even dry up. There was increasing commentary and even several media articles headlining that the great unwinding of the tech boom had begun. Fast forward to midsummer, and the conversation in the technology hubs has entirely changed. The pandemic has had a meaningful impact on the life of startups, but not always in expected ways. Some industries have thrived, even accelerated, while others now face secular declines with structural transformations ahead. But overall, the net effect of COVID has really been to accelerate the disruptive role of technology across industries. In the latest dispatch of Mint Startup Diaries, we bring to you the investor's perspective decoding the impact. We get into a conversation with Dev Khare at Lightspeed Venture Partners, whose portfolio includes Oyo, Uran, Baiju's, ShareChat, and Yellow Messenger, to name a few. Listen in.
Thank you, Shuja. Great to be on the show.
When Sequoia sort of came up with this note, at the beginning of when we were in March, when the pandemic conversation really became mainstream and really labeled as a black swan of 2020. One would want to understand from a meaningful investor like you who have seen various cycles, that what really was the conversation perhaps with you or your LPs, give some color there. And where we are right now in July, which really looks like in the middle of, the opening of the lockdown. How have the conversations changed since then? What has been Lightspeed's approach to pandemic, so to say? Have you guys been on the sidelines, the conversation with the startups? And what really have been learnings, three or key four learnings from that perspective?
Yeah, Shuja, I think in March, sort of before the lockdown started, we'd already been hearing about some of the impact of the virus in other countries, obviously China and other places. But nothing had prepared us for the uh, impact of that in India and what the Indian government would do with respect to the lockdowns and the impact that would have on the economy and the startup economy included. So when sort of March 23rd or 24th, whenever that first Sunday was of the lockdown happened, I think we all got quite concerned. And our immediate reaction was to think about our portfolio of companies which span here at Lightspeed all the way from consumer targeted companies in e-commerce and media and entertainment and other such areas, and also B2B companies that do sort of B2B commerce, B2B software, SME software, and so on. So we started thinking about the impact on them, and our first instinct was to start working with our founders to extend the runway so that they'd have 18 to 24 months of capital to sort of weather the downturn from COVID, and also to then think about how to aggressively expand, because every downturn is also an opportunity in a sense. And we were also just obviously very concerned about what was going on in the lives of ordinary Indians everywhere, including ourselves and everybody across India. And so a bunch of us investors and founders got together to start this Action COVID-19 team, ACT, where we funded a bunch of, we've granted capital to a bunch of companies to go fight COVID, PPE production, and all that sort of stuff. So that was all in that late March, early April timeframe. How it's turned out now, Shuja, is that like I said before, it's a tale of two cities. There is a set of companies and sectors that were very offline oriented, that obviously had to slow down during the lockdowns and are now picking back up. I think most severely hit were things like travel and hospitality. They're also now picking up. Some will take longer to pick up, some shorter, but I think life will, re-emerge over the next few quarters. And then on the other side, you've got a set of companies, both on the consumer and the B2B side, which saw a lift. And we've been hearing about this in the media quite a bit. Online education is an example where all of us parents, I've got two kids, and that was the time when some school was still going on, that they just had to sit at home and take classes online. We had the privilege of them being able to do that, and they really enjoyed it, and they got to see a lot more online education than we'd ever have thought. They started things like online coding classes, and just obviously online classes with their school, and so on. And I've heard that from parents around India. A lot of startups, even in the interim, have approached us and talked about how this completely changed their go to market from being offline oriented to being 100% online. So online education has really benefited. A lot of e-commerce has now benefited as more and more people have started ordering for delivery at home. And then on the B2B side, there's a bunch of software companies which enable productivity, remote work, collaboration online. I think those have all benefited as well. So it's almost like en masse society moved onto the internet. I'm sure we added like 100 million plus solid internet users in India in the last 3 months. I mean, these are people who may have been on the internet, but have now really started using it for their everyday needs.
So that sort of really means like a golden run for the VC ecosystem, right? 100 million users added to the internet, plethora of opportunities really opened up.
It is, but obviously there's still concerns, and obviously there's real impact on the country. There's a health crisis going on. There's an economic crisis going on. There's various geopolitical crises going on. So the world is in a, pretty negative place right now, I'd say. But yeah, opportunities have opened up. Golden run is, I just never like that term because it's not like stuff happens in a month or even a year. Our average investment period in a company is 8 years, right? There's no overnight success. All startups that are called overnight successes spent, 5 or 10 years making it happen. And that's not even counting the 99% of startups that didn't make it. So there's a lot of struggle that goes on under the surface here. And, it will be, I think, a great market for companies to accelerate into coming out of this COVID impact. And I think some of these founders we're seeing in India, they took very pragmatic steps to cut their burn and make themselves sort of last longer as companies. And now they're seeing sort of a lot of lift, and they're accelerating into that. And not necessarily by spending more, but just by building great products, by targeting the right markets, by going after gaps, by building stuff that is unique to India, solving Indian problems, by starting in India as their base and now accelerating abroad. All of this is happening, and I think now I'd say is I feel we here at Lightspeed, we are more busy than we were in early March before the lockdown started. So there's a lot going on. It's very exciting.
Wow. It's interesting that you mentioned that, the world is in a pretty negative place right now. And you also alluded to the fact that we have geopolitical concerns. And that sort of brings me to my next question that, there is what is really happening at the border with India and China, and the government's unprecedented move of sort of banning the Chinese apps. There is kind of commentary coming from experts that, while it sort of really opens up a huge opportunity set for a lot of Indian homegrown startups, there's also some negative commentary saying that perhaps competition should be fair and built on fair grounds. And then there's also the deafening silence of the government on the press note too, really, which was about Chinese investment coming into India. One doesn't really notice. It seems to have become the euphemism increasingly for what's really happening on the border. I want to understand from you that not really commenting on India as a sovereign entity on what really their move has been, but what do you think would be the impact on Indian startups? And do you think that money coming in from China really would be perhaps labeled as a bad word, going forward? One would be really sort of very cautious of taking money from that region, even from a grandfathered VC way, or money coming directly into investments in India?
I can comment on the impact on our companies and our portfolio, and sort of their uh, going forward thinking on capital raising. Um, so in our portfolio, we've got companies like ShareChat, which is the leading communities or groups social product in India. And then they've also got a property called Moj, which is the leading short video product in India currently. And then we've got Rio TV, which is a live streaming for games company. And then we've got Pocket FM, which is an audio content product. So all of these are in this content and media space, um, which was which is seeing a lot of activity these days. And I'd say on that side, the impact has been positive. I think there's a you know by some count 200 million plus people who are looking for new products over the last week or 10 days. Um, and they're experimenting with all sorts of products out there. The nice thing is that there are products out there for them to look at, and there's lots to choose from, whether it's products from India, products from the US, products from other parts of the world. Um, so, I mean, to be clear, I believe in open markets and free markets, and I don't believe in sort of necessarily putting up barriers. We're just reacting to the situation as it exists, and these companies are reacting to that. And ShareChat, I think they put out a tweet the other day. They're growing very nicely, millions and millions of downloads over the last few days, and they've won the market on the communities and group side. Pocket FM is surging, Rio TV is surging, and other products in the market are surging. So that's the good news. I think on the fundraising side, the nice thing that happened, Shrija, over the last 5 years, 6 years, post the 2016 sort of Geo, Aadhaar, GST sort of explosion that happened, and where the Indian economy really got going in India, is that investors from all over the world have been investing in India, growth investors and early stage. Um, we've got a lot of strategics coming in from the US and China and South Africa with Naspers and Europe and lots of other places. So there actually is a ton of interest in India. I don't think it is reliant on one country or the other. So I think we'll be fine. I think our startups just have to adjust and look, the nice thing is there's a lot of capital available in the world today, right? And it's looking for returns. Interest rates are at all-time lows. This capital is looking for returns, and there's plenty of capital available. One of our companies, Byju's, which we invested in early 2016, has been doing really well, has been in the news. There's capital available for companies that are doing well and are market leaders. Another one in our portfolio is called Odan, which is a B2B marketplace where we were the first investors. They're doing tremendously well coming out of COVID. Another one of our companies, Yellow Messenger, which is a um, chatbot platform or conversational AI platform. Actually, their business accelerated during COVID because a lot more businesses that were offline wanted to now interact with their customers online and help their customers buy from them online. And Yellow enables people to interact with internet businesses through chat, through their WhatsApp, through web bots, through voice bots, and so on. And that business sort of went sharply up. So there's plenty of capital available for those sorts of companies. There have been challenges for some companies where, like I said, they had offline sort of dependency. But even those are coming back now as the economy is opened up. I mean, I go out here in Delhi, drive out. I mean, there is commercial activity going on. Not as much as in, let's say, February or early March, but there's plenty going on.
Dave, in terms of like the key learnings for VCs, what would those really be, coming out from the pandemic?
I think going into March, we'd had 10 years worth of a bull run in the world, right? Since, well, more than 10 years, 12 years, 2008 onwards, post the financial crisis. And given the low interest rates in the US and elsewhere in the world, I think the equity markets have done very well, right, in the last 10 years, 10, 12 years. And so that percolated down to sort of from the public markets to the late stage private markets to now the early stage venture markets. And so there was some inflation, I think, in valuations towards the beginning of this year. I think there was whenever, and I've been a founder myself 20 years ago, raised venture capital and grew the company, and then it got acquired in 2003. It's a little while ago. And so I've seen how too much capital can also cause companies to be a bit looser in their execution and have a little bit more extra burn than they need to have. And I think the learning is that there's always efficiency to be had in a company. And a lot of these companies trimmed down a little bit, trimmed burn, and really have continued performing. So I think there was a little bit of sort of fat in the system, let's put it that way, that has come out of the system. I think another learning is that if you just stick to your focused core of what you're doing, lots more opportunities open up. I think coming into this year, a lot of companies had diversified into 10 different areas and tried to do everything. I think it pays to be a little bit more circumspect on that, a bit more focused, get your focused businesses to sort of moving towards profitability or profitable, and then sort of start expanding into other areas. I think that was another lesson learned. Um, and I think B2B software also came into its own in the last quarter. We'd all thought, enterprises would not buy, that would come to a grinding halt. But that's continued very strongly and has not been as impacted as consumer. So I think the shift in India from being a very consumer-centric startup ecosystem to being an enterprise and consumer ecosystem has lasted. And so that's exciting. That's a good lesson coming out, that India is going to produce world-class enterprise software companies, enterprise tech companies, and not just consumer companies.
That's sort of very beautifully laid out. Tell me one thing, Dave. When I speak with private equity investors, I mean, there seems to be a big FOMO developing on their part. They're so seduced by venture capital, and I think all of them have this realization that they perhaps missed out on investing in very meaningful businesses. When you are talking to some of these, late stage private equity investors, what really are sort of, the conversation going out there? You think there's a more increasing realization on the so-called PE, which traditionally has been, going after more steady stream of revenues, organizations which are more profitable, to look at perhaps enterprises that are not necessarily profit seeking, but can have huge growth potential. What really is your sense there?
Yeah, so I'm not that tuned into that market, but I'd say, now having been an investor for the last 14 years and then a founder before that, so being in tech since the late 90s, I'd say sort of, as business cycles come and go, different investors become interested and become disinterested. Um, and I think every investor category has its merit and is absolutely valid, and their core business is their core business, right? Um, even early stage venture investors sometimes start doing very late stage deals. Private equity players might do venture capital deals. Public market investors might do late stage privates, and so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of investing beyond sort of your core business. I don't see any sort of secular long-term trend where private equity investors become technology investors. I think if they're technology businesses that are cash flowing, there's a lot of activity, especially in mid-market private equity, which are smaller, let's say sub-billion-dollar value um, technology companies that are cash flowing, where these private equity companies come in and buy them out, lever them up, and sort of go from there. I think some of that is happening. Less so in India, more so I would say in the US and Europe currently. Um, but look, it's always good to have more capital in the ecosystem, especially late stage capital for our early stage companies as they scale. At Lightspeed, we've also, earlier this year, Lightspeed in the US announced a couple of growth funds, Lightspeed Select and Lightspeed Opportunity, which we can bring in to invest in our India companies, and have been doing so for the last several years. So as Lightspeed, we can do early stage and later stage investments, and support our companies all the way through. But the more later stage capital there is, the better, and it's good for our Indian ecosystem. I think there's been a dearth of capital in the past. I feel that there's plenty of capital now.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Plenty of capital. That brings me to my next question. That this entire Atmanirbhar campaign of the government and this entire narrative building around deglocalization, really, and the interconnectedness of supply chains. What has that really meant for Indian startups? Has they been thinking in the VC boardrooms to perhaps you know think of some of those think on those lines on how you're building out products, because the world is increasingly not really as flat as Thomas Friedman thought it to be perhaps a few years back.
I think that quote that he did came from Mr. Narayan Murthy, if I remember correctly, or maybe Nandan Nilekani. When he was meeting him, I think he quoted him. But in terms of Indian companies building for the Indian customers, I must say that for us here at Lightspeed, at least, that's been the case since the beginning. I remember one of our first investments in India, I think it was 2010 or so, was a company called Indian Energy Exchange, which is a B2B marketplace to trade electricity. It might sound really obscure, but we know that India has or had an electricity problem with all the blackouts that we used to have at that time. Now, it turns out that India as a whole has more electricity supply than demand, but it's unevenly distributed all over the place. And a marketplace made perfect sense to get this electricity distributed to the right places. That was an Indian company solving a very Indian problem. That was 2010, right? That company went public in 2017 at, I think, an $800 million valuation. We were the first investors, and the company didn't have to raise any more capital after that first round. So they did very well as a company and solved a very Indian problem. That's been the case. ShareChat, which I've already mentioned, is the first product in India, first company in India to launch in 14 different languages. It's the market leader in communities and groups. It's an Indian product for the Indian community. Uran, as a B2B commerce market, was the first in its category to do B2B commerce between retailers and their suppliers, right? All of these are first. Here at Lightspeed, we're also very focused on enterprise software, focused on the India market. I talked about Yellow Messenger. That started with Indian customers, serving sort of BFSI companies and retailers and Bajaj and a bunch of these companies were their customers. And so we believe in the Indian market. We've been investing behind companies building for the Indian market. I don't know, but I think maybe what you're referring to is sort of, Indian corporates using software from elsewhere, like from SAP or Oracle or, wherever else, or Indian consumers using services from elsewhere, whether it's Facebook or whatever else there might be, right? That is the case. I do think that makes India a more attractive market when it's open and there's competition, and may the best person win. I don't think that means that Indian companies should not compete on that world class level. I actually think Indian companies can. Indian companies win all over the world. And we in the ecosystem, not in our portfolio, companies like Freshworks and Zoho are companies that have won on a global basis, Dhruva and a bunch of others. On the consumer side, there's Indian companies that have gone abroad to Southeast Asia. One of our companies, Magic Pin, is in Indonesia right now. You've heard of Oyo, of course, and Ola has gone to, I think, Australia and the UK. Even the consumer companies are winning abroad. So we can absolutely compete on the world-class level, just like the old economy in India has competed with open sort of borders in a sense. Our two-wheelers industry is the best in the world and very efficient. Steel manufacturing, a whole bunch of other stuff is very efficient. We actually invested in a company called Zetwork, which is a manufacturing marketplace. And people might think India doesn't have an advantage in manufacturing. It turns out when we did the work that India has a comparative advantage to China in high value, low volume manufacturing. This is manufacturing of boilers and roofing and sort of electric light poles and custom manufacturing, and we have an advantage in that. And Zetwork is the leader in India in B2B manufacturing, and it partners with all these small businesses in India that are small factories and brings them into the global marketplace. There's absolutely an advantage there. That's building an Indian company, serving Indian customers, yet also serving customers in the US and Europe and everywhere else. So, you know, I think there's a narrative on sort of, for some reason, that started happening 10 years ago, that Indian companies were copies of something happening elsewhere. Maybe there was some of that happening, but on the whole, I think founders here are solving problems for India. What is Misho? Where is the equivalent of that elsewhere in the world, right? I.e. Indian Energy Exchange or ShareChat or Yellow or who's done two-wheelers like Ola has, right? Who's built up guest houses to be like hotels like Oyo has in the world? Like nobody's done that. This is Indian innovation. I'll take it all the way back to Bharti Airtel. Nobody had done an asset-light mobile operator in the world until they did it. Then it got copied everywhere else in the world, right? So this innovation comes in all sorts of ways, and I think we've been innovating here in India at the business model level. I think what we now need going forward is more innovation at the 0 to 1 technology level. So when we started to see things in space tech now, in drones, in biotech, in these areas that are interesting 0 to 1 innovations that are starting to come out of India. I think that'll be really fun over the next decade.
My concluding question to you, Dev, is just about this interesting initiative that you're part of, India Internet Day, and how is that sort of coming along?
It's coming along very well. It's happening on August 7th and 8th. It's all online, purely online, and we're going to have thousands of people attending there. We've got two very specific tracks that are going to be exciting for people to tune into. One is a first of its kind in India, which is a track on SME technology. India has the largest number of SMEs in the world at 60 million, and they've never used technology before. And so this is a complete white space that we're seeing marketplaces, software companies, financial services companies, lots of players going into. And for the first time in India, we will have panels focused on each of these areas I just talked about. One very fun panel there on actually owners of these small businesses talking on the panel, a factory owner, a kirana store owner, and so on and so forth, speaking together and talking about their problems, how they got through COVID and how they were doing before COVID and how they use technology and all that stuff. That's one track that I think is unique, and people should attend for that. Again, purely online from the safety and the comfort of your home. And the second is more of a consumer track, which is how COVID had an impact on the consumer side and how these companies are reimagining themselves as they come out of COVID. We're going to have some exciting speakers. Because it's online, the speakers will be from abroad as well. So we can learn from other countries and founders and investors who've done spectacularly well in those other places. So it's going to be an exciting conference. Would love to have your viewers join us.
Absolutely, Dev. I look forward to this. And thank you so much for sort of coming on board and sharing those insights with us. Until the time we see you next, goodbye and good luck, and do stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Shrija. Thank you.